Aloha, everyone. We're going to get started again. My name's John Hart. I'm the moderator for this session. Session is Enforcement Trends for Construction Stormwater and Upcoming Changes to E-Signature Requirements. Again, these sessions are all being streamed. So those online, if you want to ask questions afterwards, please use the portal to ask those questions, type them in. But again, I want to introduce the speakers. Jamie, again, is going to present this time. I kind of had it a little backwards last time, and Randy's going to be the backup for support to Jamie. Both Jamie and Randy work for the Hawaii Department of Health Clean Water Branch. Both are enforcement, I believe. Those are the good guys, right? No, wait a minute. I don't know. But again, Jamie is a water geek, but you know what? Jamie is she came from consulting also. So she has that aspect to it and can see things, I think, in a different light than at some point in time. But again, without further ado, help me welcome both Jamie and Randy.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. It's nice to be back. It's really nice to see so many familiar faces. Yeah, so like John mentioned, I was in consulting for about 5 years. I just got back to DOH about 6 months ago. Happy to be back there and back with the crew. We're enforcement, but we're not too scary, I think. Before that, I was at DOH for about 10 years, 2006 to about 2017. And then going into consulting was really an interesting experience, being on the regulated side. So I wanted to do this talk. I got really up in arms about doing this talk. I hope it's not too boring, but I wanted to do this talk because after being away for 5 years and seeing how hard a lot of construction sites really do work, I wanted to kind of give a cheat sheet, like, hey, if you don't want to deal with an enforcement action, then these are some of the things to consider. So that was one of my focus for today. But I'll get started. And after that, I'm also going to give a quick update to electronic signatures. So if anybody has to do anything with the e-permitting portal, it's something to consider. So I wanted to talk about our enforcement parties. Clean Water Branch administers NPDES permits, and NPDES includes a whole bunch of different things. But at the heart of it, we're here to protect human health and the environment. That's our main goal always. We also regulate wastewater discharges, whether it be municipal or industrial, or dewatering. Dewatering is technically a wastewater. As well as large-scale stormwater discharges from industrial sites, landfills, recycling facilities, the MS4 programs, DOT and the city, airports, harbors. So, we're looking at all of those things, as well as other random polluted discharges that occur, molasses spills or whatever. So we're looking at a bunch of different things, and they're all important. And so we do have a compliance monitoring strategy. We call it a compliance monitoring strategy, and it's intended for NPDES permits specifically. And we prioritize things based on the different types of NPDES permits we have. And I just wanted to offer a little bit of context to our purview at Clean Water Branch, so you can see where construction fits in, and then I'll get into construction a little bit more. But again, because we have so many different types of permits, they are inspected at different frequencies. The major permits, like our wastewater treatment plants, are inspected once every 2 years. Our smaller plants, as well as our MS4s, may be inspected once per permit term, so that's about 5 years. NPS permits are typically 5 years. And then we have our industrial stormwater facilities. They can be really dirty, so we try to get to 10% of those every year. And for construction stormwater, we also do 10% every year. I have a little caveat there, but because we have so many construction permits, I want to say any average year we have about 800 on the books. 10% would be 80, but the EPA, who we answered to, allows us to do a little bit less. So we actually probably do only about 40 a year for construction. And, there's only 4 of us really to do these inspections. So we have to pick and choose what we're going to do very specifically, and we try to target to get the most out of our time. So I'll talk about that in a little bit. The inspection and enforcement process, we start off selecting our sites based on some of our priorities and some of our concerns. We go out, do that inspection. They're unannounced. We don't really tell people, so we just kind of show up and really ruin your day. And we go back to office. We'll prepare a report, and that usually takes maybe a day or two. And then we'll prepare any required enforcement actions, whether it's like a transmittal letter, hopefully, or a field citation or a notice of violation. We'll prepare those. So depending on how bad it was, it may take a little bit more time. But if it's not too bad, we can hopefully get those out within a week, get those mailed out within 2. And the site gets it. You have 20 days to respond, 20 calendar days to respond, which is never fun because I know everyone's already busy. But the site will respond and they'll be awesome, and then we get to close that enforcement action. So that's basically how things progress and how they go. And the whole point, the goals of doing these inspections is to really get a sense of how permit holders are doing. Obviously, individual sites, we're giving them a lot of feedback on compliance and how they're doing with their BMPs, but we go out to a lot of sites, so we get a sense of how the industry is doing and how the construction industry as a whole needs to improve, or what they're doing really well and what we want to share with other people. We really want to resolve issues on site and again, industry-wide, and keep the construction industry moving forward. And we really want to level that playing field, make sure good practices are happening everywhere, and make sure bad practices are not being perpetuated. Okay, so those are our goals and our compliance monitoring strategy to achieve those goals. Again, 10% of our construction permit universe every year, but a little bit less, because the truth is not all construction sites that have a permit are active. You get the permit and then maybe you got to go out to bid and everything. So not everyone's active. So we only do about 40 a year. I want to make a note that because we're tracking what's active and what's not, I know you guys have to deal with things like the notice of start and the notice of cessation. So those of you who do those, thank you, because they're really important. They make our lives very difficult or very easy. So thank you for doing those. And we have priorities. Right now, at this point in time, our priorities for construction are actually on Hawaii Island and Kauai Island and Maui. And the reason we've chosen those priorities is very simple. Here on Oahu and on parts of Maui, we have MS4 programs. And I think being here at this conference, a lot of you already know these MS4 programs, whether you're inspecting for them, whether you're working with the stormwater checklist as an inspector, or you're a design PM who has all these things that they've got hoops to go through and things to check on. It's all part of a larger system for your MS4 construction runoff control program that basically allows us to not worry so much about DOT construction sites here on Oahu or on Maui. We don't have to worry too much about the city sites that are being overseen by the third-party inspection program. So our priorities really were turned towards Kauai, Hawaii Island, and Maui, who really don't get that extra insight and oversight from these MS4 programs. So going into construction inspections, all of the stats that I'm going to throw out now are construction specifically. In 2022, we had a whole bunch of different types of inspections, wastewater, industrial, and such. Construction stormwater, we had 38 inspections in 2022, and that comprised 51% of all of the inspections we did at Clean Water Branch in the enforcement section. And I started about 6 months ago, so keep in mind the crew is running with 2 full-time EHSs, a very, very new engineer, so 3 people basically, no, I'm sorry, 4. 3 EHSs and 1 new engineer, so it was 4 people who did all of those inspections. So construction definitely is one of our heaviest loads. Like I mentioned, once you have an inspection and we look at the findings, we'll figure out what kind of enforcement action is appropriate for the site. You know, if your site is pretty good, you're obviously good with your paperwork, your BMPs are pretty well maintained. The dream for all of us is to get a transmittal letter where we send that report to you and say, keep up what you're doing, and maybe check out the report to see if there's anything you can do better, but otherwise keep moving forward, keep doing what you're doing. I love those because I'm a marshmallow and I really like telling people they're doing great, but it's also less work. It's less work for everyone, so it's my favorite. The next step up is a field citation. A field citation is a quick offer to settle violations. So there's a set list of violations that we can issue a field citation for. It's kind of like a ticket. So you're given 20 days to correct, 20 days to pay a penalty, and usually those penalties are smaller because they're quick settlements. But you know, that's the next step of enforcement action. The one after that is a notice of violation and order, and those are always a lot heftier. So if you've got a lot more problems at your site, we'll go into a notice of violation and order. And those, because they're not quick settlements, they always have higher penalties. The penalties are they're just more, they're based off of our penalty policy. And there's always more corrections to them. But you have 20 days to respond. You're able to contest any kind of allegations or violations that we're alleging. But yeah, so that's the notice of violation and order. It's a lot of work, so you never really want to find yourself in that boat. For construction, stormwater, the next two enforcement actions are a lot more unlikely, hopefully. But there's a consent decree, and that's when the Department of Health and maybe the EPA and the permittee or the violator will come into like negotiations basically, and they'll create a legal document where the violator has to do all these things, and it's basically to address all of the issues that have been put on the books. So consent decrees, usually pretty big, take months to years to negotiate, just something you don't want to find yourself in. Just a little bit of history, DOT Highways had a consent decree, or DOT Highways and Airports, I think it was, had a consent decree a while ago, and kind of just kicked butt with it. Like, they created this program, and we're sitting here because of that program. They took that consent decree and they just ran with it, and they did amazing things. Maui Wastewater also did the same thing. So sometimes consent decrees are good in that, you know, a regulated entity can sort of have some input on how they want to change and move forward, and we put it into a legal document, and it goes that way. The administrative order and consent is very similar, where the two parties come together and make some decisions, but those are usually smaller and easier to execute. So again, those big types of enforcement action, you know, 99% of the time are never for an individual construction site. So I really wanted to focus on the field citation because that's the one that you're a lot more likely to see in what you do. So just a quick reminder with our enforcement actions, penalties and corrective actions are always proportionate to the amount of risk and harm that has happened. So you've got big swaths of open exposed soils that are causing discharges. You've caused a lot more environmental harm. You've put off a lot of your compliance work. That's always going to have a higher penalty. So just keep that one in mind. Okay, so field citations, again, this is the one that you're going to see the most often. And again, coming back to DOH, being a regulator again was, it took a lot of adjustment because I was working on the consulting side, I was working with construction projects, and I saw how much everyone was doing. So coming back into regulation, I was like, oh, but you know, they're working so hard, and like, again, I'm a big marshmallow, so I had to put my regulator pants back on and be like, oh, that's right, I'm leveling the playing field. But I needed to adjust to that again, and I needed to remember that like everybody's got to kind of keep on top of things. So it was an adjustment again to realize, hey, field citations are kind of the new norm. I'm gonna throw that out there. When I first started doing this work, 16 years ago, our warning letters were the norm. We called them notices of apparent violation, NAVs. And, we wrote them for construction sites when they needed to do a lot of corrective actions, and they had 20 days to respond, but there was no penalty. But there has been a lot of education, there's been a lot of outreach, and good construction companies have been doing a ton to comply. And we needed to level that playing field, so we set the bar higher. And so now field citations are probably our most common enforcement action. So some background on the field citations. We have them established in the Hawaii Administrative Rules 1155. So if you ever wanted to read a rule, or if you have insomnia, this is where to go. There are set violations. There's 6 violations in there specifically, and we have set penalties for those violations. So the Hawaii Administrative Rules go out to public comment whenever we update them. So people have the opportunity, whether you're an environmental watchdog, or you're a construction industry, or you're an MS4 person, there's an opportunity to make comment on our field citations and whether or not they're fair or appropriate or should be changed. So because they've already been vetted, we can issue them, issue the penalties, and just be done with it. We don't have to public notice them. There's not that contestation or hearing thing allowed because it's just a quick offer. It's already been vetted. So if you ever get one of the field citations, you can reject it or you can accept it. And if you accept it, you sign on the line, you pay your penalty, you do your corrective actions. If you reject it and you want to sort of contest the violations we're alleging, you can do that. The problem with that is typically rejection will force us to turn around and issue a notice of violation and order. And because the field citation, the penalties are already set, the truth is they're set lower than our penalty policy. So if you get a field citation for $500 and reject it, you might turn around and get a novo for $1,000. Yeah, so that's the field citation. It's meant to be quick and easy for everybody. Try to minimize the amount of work and harm. So the 6 violations that are established in the HAR for field citations, obviously, if you have discharged pollutants to the state waters, that's the very first one. Your penalty for the first time is $500. If it happens again, it's up to $2,000. So that's thankfully not as common as I thought it would be, but that's one of the things that you can get a field citation for. Also, if you don't have an NPDES permit, if you fail to correctly install, implement, or maintain BMPs as required, that's another one. If you fail to monitor as required, and monitoring could be like what Randy was talking about with dewatering and hydrotesting permits, you have to monitor your discharges. It could also be monitoring your sites, as in doing your inspections. So that's another one to pay attention to. As well as failing to keep your paperwork on site, the SWIP, super important document. We want to see that you're using it and it's live and active and up to date. Your notice of intent, your NGPC, and your DMRs, if you have DMRs for hydrotesting or dewatering. So you got to keep those on site. And then the last one is failing to submit required documents, reports, or submittals. Those aren't quite as common, but that's an important one to keep in mind. So 6 set violations, different types of penalties depending on what they are, but generally starting at 100 to 500 and going up if you're a repeat violator. Okay, so enforcement actions. You can see that over time, over the last 7 years, construction has had a chunk of the total enforcement actions that we've issued. It's varied year to year. 2020 is an interesting one. Everything went down that year because you couldn't go out and do inspections. So that was a low one for construction, but I'm sure everyone enjoyed the break a little bit. But 2022, this past year, that we can focus on that one. Total of 45 enforcement actions, 23 of them were for construction. So again, construction is about half of our inspections. So it makes sense that it's about half of our enforcement actions. As far as enforcement actions issued, the breakdown and types of enforcement actions that we've issued, Again, since field citations have been in existence, they've made up the majority of our enforcement actions. Because the truth is, most of our permittees, aren't like doing really terrible, terrible stuff, but also need a lot of reminders on some of the things that they should be doing that they're falling back on. So field citations, by far the most common. Novos are a small portion. Those are in blue. And that's a good thing because novos really are kind of set aside for the worst violations. And the brown that comes in every once in a while, those are administrative orders on consent. And that's when something kind of bad is going on, but the violator is really open to cooperating. So those aren't super common, but they occur often enough. So field citations, the one to watch out for. Okay, so I wanted to also break down like what's our most common penalties, like what are you expecting when you do get a field citation? It's very uncommon that you're getting that $100 field citation. I think that's if you haven't submitted NOC, yeah, signing things. Don't have your SWIP on site experience, but $500 is your most common. And that's something that I'll go into a little bit more. So out of all of the field citations we issued, granted, some field citations have more than one violation, like there might be 2 counts. So these numbers don't necessarily exactly count, one field citation, one violation, but this $500 penalty is the most common that we issue. And every once in a while, it'll get a little bit higher because there's 2 violations. That's the 600, the 1,000, the 1,100. That's when there's 2 violations occurring. And the 2,500 is more likely when we've had to come out to your site more than once. Okay, so this one I wanted to highlight too. So what are we citing the most? So by far, our most popular citation, our most common citation is the failure to install, implement, or properly maintain BMPs. I'm sure any inspector, any PM on a construction site is very familiar with that concept of having to be like, hey, we've got to change out those mulch socks, or why isn't that porta potty secured? So BMPs, by far, the most common citation, that's $500. Failure to monitor, again, is another way of saying failure to do your inspections. So if people aren't doing their weekly inspections, that's a pretty common one also. And as well as not having your records. You don't have your NGPC on site, you can get a field citation. You don't have your SWIP, maybe it's not certified, maybe it's 2 years old and completely outdated, you can get a field citation for that. Okay, so now understanding why we're issuing these field citations, what things we're issuing for, I kind of wanted to go into some tips on how to get a transmittal letter, because again, those are my favorite, and I'm a marshmallow and I hate telling people that they're wrong. But I wanted to throw out some tips to get a transmittal letter, because this is definitely targeted more towards our neighbor islands. This is a talk I want to give on the Big Island and on Kauai too, because I want them to get up to date on their awareness. Because here on Oahu, I'm sure a lot of people in this room, this is all stuff you already know. You guys are kind of in the luxury of being in an MS4 program. And I'm sure Rodney and Ty are out there like, luxury of an MS4 program? Excuse me. You guys work so hard. I'm going to throw that out there. You work so hard. Your consultants work so hard. And everyone who's a part of the MS4 program works really hard. But you've created a system of compliance. You've got people who are reviewing your SWIP and pushing that. You've got set specifications and field notes that go into every design. And that's all part of the things that the MS4 program has, nurtured over the last 15 years. So you guys have already set up this system of compliance. And the likelihood is if you and your contractors follow that system, you're going to get a transmittal letter. Even if you have a mulch sock that's ripped, or maybe a silt fence that isn't perfect. If you have that system all together, you're very likely to get a transmittal letter. So the first tip I wanted to put out there is documentation. Have your SWIP and have it up to date. Have your NOI and your NGPC. And those are things that you can put together before your construction project even starts. Put it in a binder, like sites who have them in a binder, it's like, just grab it from the binder. If you're not there, if you're the environmental person and you're not there for that inspection, because we show up at the worst time, we will. I don't know how we do it, but we do. Anybody will know that SWIP binder's up there. So, even if you're not there, there's somebody who can point us towards that, and that's really great for awareness. When you create that binder or binders, leave a space for your inspection reports, because those are going to happen at least weekly, as well as space for your corrective actions and your training logs. And hopefully you'll have a section that stays empty for your non-compliance reports, but at least have a section for that, so it's there if you ever need it. So besides your paperwork, you want your paperwork in line. That's always, when we first see that on site, it's like, oh great, these guys, they know what they're doing. They've got awareness. This is going to be good. So when we actually go out onto your site and start walking around and looking at your BMPs, we're already there in kind of a good mood. So when we're looking at your BMPs, we might have a little bit more compassion, or I might, because again, marshmallow. But as far as like implementing your BMPs, again, that's your most common citation. So I would say create a system of tasks. My old boss, John Katihira, always used to like to say, know what you need to do, when you're going to do it, and who's going to do it. So the SWIP and the BMP plan updates, have somebody on that. That's always their thing that they're going to do. Maybe it's on a weekly basis. And they know, hey, every Friday at 1 o'clock, I'm going to do this. SWIP certification. That's an easy one that catches a lot of people, because how often do you get to put something in front of your authorized representative or your certifying person and get their signature? That's a real pain. So if you know every quarter you're going to give your SWIP to your PM, your updated SWIP to your PM to go get signed, it's at least kind of set and scheduled, and you can project it out and expect it. And you got to know who's going to do it, right? Is it your contractor? Is it your PM? Figure that out in the beginning. Inspections, at least weekly, who's going to do it? Is it the contractor? And who from your contractor? Is it your DOT inspector? Know who's going to do those inspections, have the forms ready, the blank ones, so they can use it every time, and make sure those forms also allow some space for corrective actions, because that's technically supposed to be documented also, or have separate corrective action sheets. And just make sure you know who's going to do it and how often they need to. Training logs, those are as needed, but it's something we always look for. So if your contractor does this conference, have their certificate in the binder. If you do a training before the construction project goes live, maybe you guys do toolbox meetings, have that in your binder also, and make sure you know that you're supposed to put that in there and who's going to do that. And the last thing, of course, is BMPs. Just stay on it. It's not easy. I know it's constant maintenance, constantly changing. So I sympathize with this, but it's really important. Obviously, when it comes down to the things, this is what's going to keep that polluted runoff from leaving your site. So make sure you install them per your SWIP, and make sure they make sense. So like if your plan doesn't quite work out, like you've got a silt fence somewhere that just doesn't quite make sense, like amend your SWIP. You have to make those amendments, you have to make those changes, because if they don't make sense and we're out there looking at them, we're like, oh, these guys aren't thinking about it. So another thing about that is, because you're looking at your SWIP, you're looking at your BMP plan, you're looking at your BMPs weekly, and you're looking at whether or not they make sense. When we come onto site and we want to talk about your BMPs, you can talk about them with us. That's really important. When we come out on site, don't clam up. We want to hear about everything you're struggling with, because it's our opportunity to learn what you're dealing with, as well as what the industry deals with. So, talk to us and be able to explain those BMPs, why you made changes, what you might be changing later. And of course, maintain. I threw out a few ones that are very, very common for us to see. So mulch socks, always ripping, always flattening. I swear it's like a week and they're like, they've deflated. But yeah, keep on top of the mulch socks. they're so easy to install, but they're always need maintenance. Concrete washout, very, very common to run out of space. If you've filled your concrete washout and rain is being projected, cover it if you can. Watch out for leaks or spills around the washout or just around your site. Those are very common. Cover your stockpiles. I think DOT is one of like the biggest superstars of covering your stockpiles, because every time I'm on that freeway, I'm like, oh, covered stockpile, oh, covered stockpile, and there's like a malt sock around it, and it looks great. So yeah, so make sure you cover your stockpiles. And then the last thing, it's not glamorous, but secure your porta potties. You know, whether you like use those straps and cinch it to a cinder block, or like even cinch it to a tree or something, but secure your porta potties. One of my most memorable calls that I got at the Department of Health was a contractor called and said, hey, you know, we had a wastewater spill. It was a porta potty, it got tipped over. And, you know, we cleaned up the liquid and it got vacked up and we disinfected. You know, do I have to report that? And I asked him, did you get to a storm drain or a state water? And he's like, oh, no, it was like just on the grass. I'm like, oh, okay, great. I don't think you need to report that to anyone. I think you're fine. He's like, yeah, it was a bad day. There was a guy in there when it tipped. And I was like, oh. Yeah, so secure your porta potties. It is worth it. That poor guy. Okay, so those are my tips to get a transmittal letter. Before I keep rambling on, I'm going to move on to electronic signatures after this. Did anyone have any questions? Or Randy, did you want to say anything about our enforcement strategies? Yeah. I guess my last parting note is if you get a field citation, don't panic. Again, it's our most common enforcement action that we put out there. Even really good sites get them because BMPs are hard to maintain. So don't panic, just do your best. And you know, if you need more than 20 days, call us, that kind of thing. Don't be afraid to call us if you get one. Oh, I have 10 minutes. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I ramble. I'm sorry. Electronic signatures. Okay, so big thing, big point of all of this is that when you submit anything, a notice of intent, a compliance report, the notice of cessation, your notice of start, goes to our e-permitting portal. How many of you have had to deal with the e-permitting portal? It sucks, right? So that just popped out. I'm sorry. I hope my branch chief doesn't hear that. But e-permitting portal is not easy. And if you're doing hard copy, like you don't have your electronic signature yet, you're doing a CD or a USB drive, you're mailing it into us or you're dropping it off. It's very labor intensive. And just a fun little fact, MPDS, we're an environmental program, but you know, up to like 10 years ago, we were the second largest generator of paperwork in the US like federal government. It's so shameful. And we were only second to the tax system. But yeah, so I was like, oh, this is terrible. So so electronic signatures is a really great thing. We're implementing them now. The signatures are really important because MPDS is a self-regulating program. It's very easy to cheat. You know, if you do hydro testing or dewatering and you're like, I'm gonna take my sample 10 minutes into my discharge because you know what, it's clear by then. Super easy to cheat. MPDS, it's built on self-monitoring and it's built on integrity. So the signature that we get, whether it's hard or electronic, wet signature, we use that because that's how we do criminal prosecution. Okay, so if somebody certifies something and says, this is truthful to the best of my knowledge, then if someone's lying and we find out, we go back to that signature and say, hey, you falsified, and that's a crime. So the MPDS signature, really important. We recently got approval, it's called CROMER approval, cross-media electronic reporting rule from the EPA. So we got approval from DPA for CROMER that we have enough security systems in place to accept computer signatures and it'll hold up in court. So we finally got that. It's amazing. It'll work with the e-permitting portal. If you have an electronic signature, no more CDs, no more USB drives, no more mailing, no more dropping off, and it's just so much easier. So I do want to make this warning. electronic signatures were rolled out early last year, I think at least by January 2021, and they've been optional up until this point. But come January 31st, 2023, they're going to be purely, like, we're not going to accept hard copy signatures anymore. So that's the big thing that I wanted to throw out there to anyone who has to do e-permitting portal submittals. So whoever your signatories are going to be, your certifying person, your authorized rep, make sure they get their e-signatures, their electronic signatures, and try to do it early. For whatever reason, our e-signature forms, they're very simple, but they go to our main office at Kinaahale. They're vetted by like our security office from our HISO computer security office. It takes about a month to get your e-signature. So if you know that you've got to make a submittal by like February 2nd, you got to make sure you have that e-signature ready by then, and it's going to take a month. And again, this is for everybody. So there is a distinct possibility that in the next couple of months, we're going to get a ton of e-signature forms. And so that 1 month processing time that we do now might take longer. So try to get those now. Okay, so beauty of, so the e-signature form, you just download the form. It's very simple. It's a 2-pager. What's your name? What's your mailing address? Very simple. But the trick to that is it has to be notarized. So you've got to go to a notary or get a notary. So it's going to take a little bit of time. So you send that form in notarized and you wait for your approval. And then we'll get back to you and send you your electronic signature key. Electronic signatures are not meant to be shared. So if you're a director, and there's a very unlikely chance that a director is sitting here in this room listening to me, but if you've got a director, only that director can use that e-signature. So there's no sharing. And once that electronic signature comes through, are you a consultant? Are you a PM? Are you an inspector preparing the reports for your director to sign or your district engineer to sign? Use the electronic form specifically. I don't know if you can see it really well, but the green arrow, if you're doing a compliance submittal, maybe you have to submit a non-compliance report. There's the traditional hard copy form, that's the first one. The second one with the green arrow is the electronic signature form. So you would go ahead and fill that out, and you would share it with your signatory. It's an option in the program, and they'll get an email notification that you've got something ready to sign. So the e-signature forms, the beauty about them to me is that they're shorter. The old compliance submittal form, you had to go through about 11 sections, even if you only had to submit one, and you had to go through all of them. But now they're a lot more streamlined, it's a shorter form, and it's very fast to submit. So that part's great. The tricky part, I think DOT has experienced this a lot. You got to design a workflow. Like, who's going to be your signatory? If your notice of intent is prepared by your designer, how are they going to email that to your certifying person to sign? Because your certifying person has to sign your notice of intent. As you go along into construction, if you're doing the notice of start, your monthly reports, any kind of discharge reports, who's going to sign those? Is it going to be your district engineer? Is it going to be the director? Have those things decided up front and make sure the people who are executing these things, like your PMs, make sure they know who to send it to. Create that workflow, create that SOP, make it simple for everybody to know exactly who to send and who's going to sign. And last bit, the notice of cessation always also has to be the certifying person. Okay, so it occurred to me as I was talking that I probably should have talked about how to use the referral form. Like once you do your electronic form, you send it to your director or your district engineer or whoever who's going to sign it. I didn't think of that yesterday, so I don't have that in there. But I do also have a bunch of links to some resources, including a handy YouTube video that should cover it. But my last pieces of advice with this, the electronic signatures, I think DOT is pretty set. So if you're with DOT, thank your MS4 program and your consultants because they've figured a lot of things out already. But if your program has not figured out a workflow yet, I would say create redundancy. You have a certifying person and it is one person, it is your director. And there's no wiggle room to that. and only he can use, or he or she can use that electronic signature. So you can create redundancy by naming an authorized rep. And even more so, you can create an authorized rep who's a person or a position. So say it's your Oahu district engineer who's your authorized representative. If that person goes on vacation for a week, are all of your submittals going to stop? No, because you've got someone TAing. And if they have an electronic signature, then they can make submittals too. So create that redundancy as much as you can. Name a position for an authorized rep, it might be easier. And also, like, if you have people who you kind of know, like if you're the authorized rep and you know, hey, I go out of town and like these 3 people are always the people that I go to TA, have them get an electronic signature, because anybody can get an electronic signature, and just have it waiting in the wings. So yeah, that's my advice.
Maybe I have a question regarding the certified.
Hey, Nico.
Can we go a step further and let her get
Oh.
this? We're running short on time.
Yeah, so my last slide for anybody who gets this is just some links. There's a YouTube video on how to work with the electronic signature and fill out the forms. Our website has some handy dandy links, as well as like an FAQ page. And the link to the e-signature form itself is included too. Nico.
Yeah, so regarding the certifying person, has DOH looked at delegating that authority to others within the organization?
Not really. Who can be a certifying person is written in the 40 CFRs, the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 40. That's established by Clean Water Act, by NPDES program, and we perpetuate it as a state. So we don't have a lot of wiggle room on that one. For municipal or government agencies, to shorthand it, the people who qualify for certifying persons are people like mayors, directors, the governor. So like the director is really rough, but at the same time, it's better than a mayor or a governor. Yeah.
Jamie, were you on your last slide?
I'm sorry, what?
Were you on your last
I
slide?
am. I just
Okay.
have like a goodbye slide.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much for the presentation, Jamie.
Oh, yes.
We're
Thank
going to
you.
open it up for Q&A. Those online, please just type it through the portal.
Oh, Michelle Honma. I'm sorry. Michelle Honma from.
My name is Bob Shen, and
Hi, Bob.
hello. It's not a question or comment, basically, what I'm saying. I started working on this MSO program about 2004, and at that time, it was really sort of confrontational between the parties, DOH, DOT, Department of Justice, EPA. So I'm really, really glad how far we came from today to what it was 15, 20 years ago. I have to give a lot of kudos to Jamie and Matt, because they're the nicest regulators I ever met in my life. She's not a marshmallow. She's a very hardworking, cooperative individual. Okay? So, and I have to give kudos to guy who succeeded me, Rodney Gerard. He's very, very good, and he's very, very hardworking.
Oh,
And I have to give kudos to my helpful person, Larissa Sato and WSP, who helped us get really started on this program, and then Enviro Services, who took over. But that's all I have to say. Thank you so much.
I agree, Bob.
Thanks for those sentiments. Any other questions here? Okay, so
No, Kaisen.
Thank you both for your presentation. Just a quick question. Given that field citation is the most popular enforcement action, could you share a little bit about the, I guess, draft revisions to HR 1155, which proposes to increase the field citation fees, if you will?
That's a super good question. And no, I don't know what the increases are. Do you know what the increases are?
We're at least double. Yeah, but we haven't, I don't think we've actually drafted the new field citation yet, but
Yeah.
yes, I know we had talked about that one.
I actually had a question on that also. As part of your enforcement response, you say the first violation is $500, and that's in statute. What if it's egregious? What is your capability to
Yeah, then we wouldn't use a field citation, we would go to a
straight to something else? Okay,
yeah.
perfect.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I have a couple online ones. Michelle asked, so just to double check, the wet signatures will not be used anymore come January 2023. Yeah. So February 1st, all electronic. And then I have another one from Clinton. Do you have personnel on Hawaii Island for consultation? No. We have, Randy and I are both Hilo people, so we would love to. No, mostly you can call us on Oahu, 586-4309.
And Zoom is a thing. Zoom and Teams.
Oh yeah, definitely. And we do try to get out there as often as we can. So if you do want to schedule with us and we can work it into our next visit, we'll do that. I'm sorry, one last one. Are there BMP exceptions possible if, let's say, you are working on a project in an undisturbed lava field, developing property, and there is no way for any possible sediment to enter Hawaii waters? No. If there's a trigger, if you hit the 1 acre or more trigger, you have MPDS. And you have to follow the general permit. And the general permit is fairly prescriptive on the BMPs that it requires. But that being said, the general permit also does, allow exceptions. Areas that, it's not feasible or doesn't fully make sense, there may be opportunity. So you really want to look at Appendix C, it's Section 5. It lays out all of your BMPs and it has all of the potential exceptions. So Appendix C, if not, call us, 808-586-4309. Ask for Gavin.
Well, I want to thank everybody for attending this session, and Jamie, thank you so much for that presentation, and Randy, thank you
Thank
for
you,
yours
Tom.
earlier. There is still time to go visit the vendors that are here. Please visit them if you get a chance. The last session starts at 11:15. Thank you, everybody, for attending.